Hi everybody, welcome to Think Outside the Board. This is my YouTube channel. I'm your host, my name's Brian Toohey, and today I'm doing a first impressions video on Gorinto, which is a Kickstarter that I just recently received. It's a light tile laying game for 1 to 4 players. It's published by Grand Gamers Guild, and they have previously published such games as Endeavor Age of Sail, The Artemis Project, and Endangered. The designer on this game is Richard Yaner. He previously did a game called Dark.net put out by WizKids that never really got much traction. Other than that, this is his first game, so it's essentially his second published game. And the art on this game is by Josh Capel. Now, Josh has done a lot of stuff going back to the original Pandemic. He's also done 1960, The Making of the President, Endeavor Age of Sail, The Manhattan Project, Energy Empire, Belfort, the original Endeavor, In the Hall of the Mountain King, and Scoville. Those are his games that are listed in BGG's Top 1000. Now, this is a first impressions video, so I'm not going to do a full teach or a full review. I am just going to show you just enough of the mechanics in the game, hopefully for you to get a sense if it's something that you would like. And I'm going to do that next, and then I'll tell you what I thought about the game after my one play of it in this first impressions video. So this right here is the main board for Gorinto, where all the tiles are going to go. The central part here with all the tiles stacked up is called the mountain, and then you have tiles along the top and tiles along the side, and these areas are called the path. So this is sort of the starting board, and all of these tiles are 2 tiles deep, and then when you go into this middle square, these are 3 deep, and then the tile spot in the middle is 4 deep. So these will be populated from this bag here, the Gorinto tile bag, and you'll bring more tiles out in between rounds. Also for setup, you're going to have, there are 12 of these goal cards. You're going to randomly select 2. So you put these down, and at the end of each of these 4 rounds or seasons, you will score the goal cards. There are also 5 of these tile cards. They correspond to each of the 5 tiles in the game, and you're going to randomly select 2. And then at the end of the game, after the 4th round, you will score 2 points for each of the 2 tiles that have been selected for that game. Now, it's a very simple game. It takes place over 4 rounds. There's going to be a randomly selected starting player who will get this token, and then that token will pass clockwise. Each player has a player board like this that just has room to collect the 5 different tiles on it. And when you get them, you'll just put them here and stack them up. Essentially, every player has a power for each of these 5 tile types with a base value of 1. So when you have no tiles, you still have 1 wisdom in that type of tile. So players will take turns. And to take a turn, you're going to take 1 of the 10 tiles that surrounds the mountain. And you're going to move it either down anywhere along the associated column, if you're taking from the top, or anywhere along the associated row, if you're taking from the side. And then you will collect tiles in the formation specified here on the side. So a purple tile, if you place it, will be able to take tiles from the corners around it. Well, not these, but this is a bad example because it's on the side. But if this tile was, say, here, and I placed it here, I could then take tiles up to 4 from the 4 corners. Now, you're always taking the tiles that are shown on top, so you can't dig down underneath unless you're doing the earth element. So when you take the earth element, you're going to place it on a stack, and then you can get everything underneath the stack where you're placing. The white tiles, the wind tiles, are kind of the opposite of the voids. So for this tile, I could just move it over here, and then I'd be able to take the tiles on each of the 4 sides. The fire tiles and the water tiles work similarly. If you take a fire tile and you move it over, you can take up to the other 4 tiles in that column, whereas the water, you get to take up to the other 4 tiles in that row. Now, the number of tiles that you can select are limited by the tiles that you have on your player board. So at the beginning of the game, you can only take one tile. That means if I take this water tile and I place it here, I can take one tile from anywhere in the row. So the type of tile determines where you can take them from, but the number of tiles that you already have collected on your player board determine the number of tiles that you can take. And you can only ever take up to 4 tiles because there are only ever 4 corners around a void, there are only ever 4 sides around the wind, and there are only ever 4 other unexposed tiles in the column for fire or a row for water. The one exception is the earth tile, because you can take all the tiles underneath it. So if the game board state ends up putting a lot of tiles in one area and your earth is high, you can take as many tiles as you have on the earth section of your player board plus 1. So in that case, with earth only, you could get many more tiles than 4. But that's all players are doing. So every turn, a player is going to take a tile, move it, and collect whatever tiles around it they can. So there are 10 tiles to start, and as soon as there are tiles less than the number of players, you will end the round. Now, there is one variant, which is in a 2-player game. Each player will take 1 turn normally. So let's say this tile was taken, placed, tiles were taken, another tile was taken. So that means each player had 1 turn. Then on future turns, a player will take an action with the tile, and then they'll flip over one of these burrow tiles, and they will take the tile depicted on the burrow tile out of the game. It's just a way of adding a little more variability to a 2-player game, so it's not just your actions and the other player. And it makes it a little more difficult to plan ahead if you're trying to set up a move, for your next turn, because there's a chance that not only could the other player take that tile, but it could go away based on the random tile selection. So anyway, in a 2-player game, a player will take an action, then they will remove a random tile, then the second player will take an action, they'll remove a random tile, the first player will take their third action and then remove a random tile, and then the fourth player will take an action, and then the round will be done. And you'll play 4 rounds. At the end of each round, you will score these goal cards, same goal cards, over all 4 rounds. And then after the 4th round, after you've scored the goal cards for the last time, you will then score all of the tiles that you have collected in both of these colors times 2. And that's Gorinto. So I liked my play of Gorinto. I think that it is a very solid tile placement game. It begs a lot of comparisons to Azul and Reef, and I think it holds up very well to either one of those. On a first play, I'd give the game about a 7, and that's only really because I tend to like my games with higher complexity or a story element or something like that. As far as very kind of light abstract strategy games go, I think it does hold up to Azul and Reef. So if those are games that you love, that you would rate an 8 or a 9 or a 10, I think Gorinto probably will be in their company. There's only really one negative, I think, with this game, which is that it does require a lot of setup, and the tiles in the game tend to stick together. So if you've finished a game and everybody has stacks of tiles on their player board, with all of the same colors stacked on each other at the end of the game, and you just throw those in the cloth bag, then the next time you go to set it up, as you're putting out tiles, it's going to be all the same colors stuck together, which means there is a lot of energy you're going to have to put into separating all those tiles out each time and making sure that you draw one at a time as you're setting up the board. It's not a big deal, it's just a little kind of fiddly thing, but when you're playing a game like this that's a lighter game that plays fairly quickly, 30 to 60 minutes, I think, maybe 30 for 2 players, and it could get up to 60 minutes for 4 players. But generally it plays pretty quickly. So you will end up spending a significant amount of time with the game on the board doing the setup. Like the setup will take, I don't know, if you're playing a 2-player game that plays in 30 minutes and the setup takes 5 to 10 minutes, it's almost a third of the gameplay just to kind of separate those tiles and get them set up. And that's not something that you really have to deal with either with Azul or Reef. So if you love these kinds of games, but you don't like having to kind of put the tiles out one at a time to set up the game, that could be a negative for you. And neither Azul nor Reef has that kind of setup. Now, quickly to compare it to those two games. So Azul is all about drafting tiles from these 5 coasters. I like to call them coasters, but I think they're called factories in the game. But they're groups of tiles on each factory. And so you're trying to draft the colors that you want to be able to build a little grid of tiles for scoring on your player board. But the way Azul works is that if there are all of one kind of colors on a tile, you have to take all of that color. And so at the end of rounds and at the end of the game, a player can get stuck having to take a very large number of tiles that they don't want, which will give them a lot of negative points. So the sort of prime thing that you're dealing with in Azul is the drafting of those tiles, making sure that you're sort of planning ahead for your later moves and getting tiles that you can use, but also doing a little bit of kind of thinking math in your head, planning out turns ahead of time, making sure that you're not going to be the one stuck with a lot of tiles that you don't want, which means on some turns, you may not take the turn you want. You may rather take a turn to try to make sure that you're not going to get stuck with a lot of tiles. So that's kind of the most important part of the gameplay in Azul. In Reef, you don't have that kind of tile drafting. You're just choosing a card or playing a card. And so the main decision-making process in Reef is to kind of set up what color tiles you're taking now to score points later. And each player is kind of doing this on their little personal board. So it's unaffected by other players. You're just trying to set up your moves ahead of time. Gorinto is kind of somewhere in between those two. There's no drafting. There's just the tile that you choose to take. But the key decision-making process here is that combination of where do I place the tile so that I can get the most tiles, and then which tiles am I building up on my player board to make my powers as expansive as possible. Now, in the game that we played, I believe my fiance Kristen just tried to get the most tiles possible. I think every one of her moves, she was trying to get the most tiles that she could. And it paid off for her because she beat me by 15 points. I was trying to pursue the two sorts of tiles that would give me a lot of bonus points at the end of the game. I think her strategy just to get the most tiles, period, and the way it worked with the goals was more advantageous than my strategy trying to get the two kind of tiles that would score at the end of the game. Now, that may not always be the case. There are different goal cards, and they'll be different every game. So whether you want to concentrate on the goal cards or on the tile cards may change depending on what those goal cards are. But there is some nice variability in that. But just know that your main decision-making process in this game is going to be, where do I place this tile to be able to pull the tiles off of, and then what kind of tiles am I trying to get on my player board to further empower actions later in that round when I take tiles using those colors. And like I said, I think it was a very, very solid game. For now, I rated about a 7, which is about the highest score that I give for these kinds of games, at least on a first play. It's got good choices, simple choices, it's very engaging, and it's quick and easy to play. So if those things appeal to you, and if you are a fan of Azul and Reef and games like that, you may really want to give this one a look. It stands up next to them as far as I'm concerned, and it's a very, very solid, chunky tile abstract strategy game. Now, if this is your first time to the channel, please consider liking and subscribing. And thank you very much for spending a few minutes with me here to get my thoughts on the game. I hope what I said is helpful to you and can inform you on whether or not this is a purchase that you want to make. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you soon in my next video. Take care.